Good evening, everyone. This is International Master Oladapo again, and I'm actually here to go over some of the games. Actually, I'm actually going to go over one of the games that was played recently at I think the Richard Asibor Memorial Chess Championship. Um, I think this happened last weekend in Lagos, Nigeria, where you have some of the top players in Nigeria participate. Pretty interesting. We have a couple of IMs, National Masters, FIDE Masters, and yeah, it was a very interesting tournament and some very wild games. So I'm here to actually go over one of the games that was played. I think in the what round was this? I think in the second round. Yeah. So the game I'm going to go over is a game played between um, the eventual winner of the tournament, Callistus, and Tongan versus Ajibola and Olanrewaju. This pretty much is like the old versus the young, the new. The young versus the old. Callistus was on the white side of Queens Gambit, and of course, Jibola also is somebody that plays the D4 opening. So let's get right into it. So Callistus opened with the move D4. Jibola played D5. Callistus plays C4, the Queen's Gambit. Why is this a Queen's Gambit? Anytime the C4 move is made, the idea is to give up the pawn to get some central control and then just get ahead in piece development pretty much. So C4 takes pawn. Jibola is known for taking pawns, and somehow it really does make them work. Sometimes when you look at this game, you be like, what in the world is it playing? But like I said, it makes them work somehow. So you have to give him credit for that. So D takes C4, E4. Like I said earlier, the idea of the Queen's Gambit is to try to get control of all the central squares. And I mean the D4, the E4, the E5, and D5 square. So after the E4 move, Jibola said, you know what, I'm going to hold on to my pawn. Like I said, Jibola is known for this. And like I said also, he somehow makes this work. So after the move b5, which has actually been done before, a4 is the right move. Now, what's the point of the a4? The a4 is to put pressure on the pawn on b5, because the b5 pawn defends the pawn on c4. For example, if captures on a4 with the pawn, that would be a very bad move, because we have queen takes a4 check, followed by queen takes c4, and white is in the driver's seat. And of course, trying to hold on to the pawn by playing a move like a6 just loses to a b5. You cannot capture back because your rook is hanging on a8. So after the move a4, Jibola played c6. Like I said, he's going to try to hold on to his pawns. And like all this has been played before. After the move c6, Callistus played b3. Very interesting move. All these moves have been played before. Now, what's the point of the b3? Now, the idea is to weaken the pawn structure that black has, the c4, b5, and c6. If you notice, all these pawns are kind of holding on to each other. So the idea of b3 is to loosen the pawn up. For example, if he captures on b3, of course, it doesn't capture back right away. It takes the pawn on b5. And if it takes back, this bishop takes b5 check. I mean, this is just pretty strong for white. And so we don't want to get into this position. But like I said, after the move b3, e5. Another theoretical move. e5 is important because now black is trying to do two things here. Try to put pressure on the pawn on d4 and also gain some time to get the bishop on b4, put king in check, and just kind of make things a little messy. Taking on e5, of course, is not a good idea because you don't want a queen trade where the king gets stuck in the center with all the weaknesses on the queen side. I don't think it's looking so good for white. So after the move e5, knight f3. I like this move, knight f3. Knight f3. I like this move, although the computer doesn't like the move. The engine thinks in this position d e5 is good or a takes b5. But I think knight f3 is a move I would play because I like to keep the tension. I don't like to ease the pressure ease quickly in the game. So after the move knight b3, the engine actually says black has a slight edge. You know, engines are greedy anyway, so they're always going to give you the advantage if you some kind of material up. So after the move knight f3, bishop to b4 check. Now that's not a good move according to the engine. The engine just simply take on d4. Simply take on d4. It takes d4, queen takes d4, then there's the bishop check. After bishop check, we have bishop to d2, bishop takes d2, knight takes d2, and you know, it looks good for black because white is here to reclaim his extra pawn. So after the move bishop to b4 check, bishop d2, you have to block with the bishop. Any other move doesn't look good because of the advance of the pawn with tempo, and then this can be very bad for white. So bishop to d2, queen a5. Ajibola decides to keep up the pressure in the position. So there are interesting moves here. There's actually the interesting a takes b5, because when it takes the rook, you take the bishop, and this king can be really in a lot of danger because it's going to get stuck in the center. Knight f3 is coming, you know, bishop comes out, king castles, and white is looking pretty good, you know, for the exchange. But the engine said just b takes c4 is pretty good for white. Right now, white is almost like a pawn up. So after the move queen a5, b takes c4. Now let's just stay stuck. Let's just stay stuck. Let us look at the position and ask ourselves questions. Because anytime you're playing a game of chess, right, your opening preparation is very important. You know, the resulting middle game that arises from your opening is going to let you know if you've played the opening well or badly. So what am I talking about? So let us look at the position. First we're going to start with the black pieces. So black has just one minor pieces developed. That's the bishop on b4. We have the knight on b8, not yet to get in the game. There's a bishop on c8, yet to get to the game. Knight on g8, not doing anything. All right. There's a major piece out. Okay. And what else can we say about the pawn structure? The pawn structure definitely on the queen side looks a little funny, a little weird. Not to say black is losing, but it's a little weird. And of course the e5 pawn, which is under attack. So not such looking position for black. Now let's look at the white pieces. White has his knight developed on f3. Bishop is on d2. The bishop is ready to get in the game. And the knight is actually also getting in the game, because after any capture on d2, the knight could take, the queen can take. So looking at this position already, we can say this is advantage white. Why? Because he has more pieces in the game. He's not a pawn down. I don't think he's still a pawn down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he's not even a pawn down. Pawns are equal. He has more pieces in the game. So white looks pretty good in this position. So we can actually say black's opening preparation didn't go as planned. So let's continue with the game. Bishop takes d2. I like queen takes d2. Now, why do I like the move queen takes d2? Anytime you are ahead in development. Now, one thing you have to notice, the only active piece black has is the queen on a5. So by capturing with the queen, you're either forcing the queen to move, or force the queen to capture on d2, bringing another piece into the game. So white has knight on d2, knight on f3 developed, bishop out, and just castle. White is looking really good. Meanwhile, we can't say that for black. Like I said, black would have to, at this point in time, look back at this position and say, I think I really messed up the opening, you know. So queen takes d2, very good move. And actually, the engine thinks after queen takes d2, white is just winning. +2. White is just winning. So queen takes d2. Queen takes d2. Knight b takes d2, bringing another piece. Takes on d4. Now there's no rush taking back. It's important we get this bishop in the game as quick as possible. And a good square for this bishop would be that the c4 or the d3 square. So in this position, white simply captures on b5. Very good move, because you cannot get back because of the bishop takes check. In fact, you might not even need to castle. You might just step your king up to e2, your rook to either d1 or c1, and white is in the driver's seat. So after the move, knight takes on d4, c takes um, C takes b5. The engine actually preferred the move A takes b5. Pretty strong because you know, if you play this move, you know, you're gonna have to worry about this pawn push at some point. And also the pawns, if you play this move here, the pawns are kind of fixed, and white can actually play around this pawn. I mean, if we could get a knight to d2 and to b3, we could put a little pressure on that pawn. So in this position, Callistus took with the c pawn. Ajibola played c5. Like, you can't take, one of the reasons why you can't keep taking is because the more you take, the more you compromise your position. Why? Because you're behind in development. So for Ajibola in this position, he needs to keep it close as possible and just hope to survive somehow. Why? Because I said his pieces are still at home, not really doing anything. In fact, by the time they get into the game, you know, I don't think they would have a whole lot of choices because white is already pretty much ahead. And if we're looking at the end game, especially on the queen side, white has a very interesting 2 against 1, which is a good majority going to the end game. So knight b3 puts pressure on the pawn immediately. You know, there's no point trying to develop your piece. There's no point for that. Anytime you're playing a game, you know, you always want to make sure you use the initiative. That means you want to force your opponent to respond to you. That means you want to force your opponent to make defending moves. So in this position, knight b3, very good move. Putting pressure on the c pawn. So the only way to defend that is to move the knight to d7. And then there's rook to c1. And unfortunately, the black pawns on d4 and c5 are going to fall. The position is going to become more open, and white's initiative is going to keep growing. So knight b3, knight d7, rook c1, every move a threat, and bishop to b7, attacking the pawn on e4. But you really don't want to worry about the pawn on e4, because when the pawn on c5 falls, the one on d4 falls, white is just doing pretty well. So knight takes. And another thing we actually could also look here is if we try to hold on to the pawn with bishop d3, then black has the rook c8 move, holding on to those 2 pawns. And you know, it's a fight now. You know, I still think white is better, but it's still a fight. So we want to like strike while we can make something happen. So knight takes c5, d4 is hanging. Knight takes back, rook takes c5. Rook to d8, protecting the pawn on d4. Bishop d3 protects his own pawn. So let's take stock. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. White has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So advantage white. Let's look at the pieces. White has 1, 2, 3 pieces developed. Black has just 2. So that's advantage black. So what else? What else can we talk about? Well, there's really no point talking about king safety right now, because the game is actually getting in the end game, and there's no point castling. Just move your king to e2, move your rook to c1, and you're looking pretty good. So after the move bishop d3, knight to f6, putting pressure on the pawn on e4. Castles. Oh, he actually castles right here. The engine said king d2 was a very good move. I like king d2 also, because black cannot afford to take that pawn. You know, because for example, if you take with the bishop, I'm just going to pin you, win a piece, right? If you take with the knight, check, I'm going to take back. If you take, I'm going to pin you. I want to win the bishop. You say not today. I said, well, today, yes, it is today. Rook takes. And then you lose another piece. You lose the same piece. So, personally, I would have played king d2. Like I said earlier, you have to understand the stages of the game. You know, the fewer the pieces on the board, the stronger your king gets. So it's not the time to talk your king in. Not to say castles is a bad move, but personally, I would have just moved my king to d2. You know, why? Because I want to bring my rooks, you know, and I want my king to stay as close as possible to the central squares. Because when you get to the end game, your king becomes a very fighting piece. So castles, rook d7, Now this move says I want to capture your pawn, but I still don't think it can be captured, because if you take once, I take twice, you take again, I pin you, you bring your rook here, break the pin, I'm going to check on c8 and pick your rook. So you're still not trying to win this pawn. Maybe you're just trying to defend the 7th rank, which makes a lot of sense. So white plays rook c1. Now let's take stock again. You know, and that's one thing you always have to do when you're playing a game of chess. Always take stock. Like, ask yourself who's better and why. Always take stock, because that's going to help you with the choice of moves you make in a game. If you don't take stock and you're just moving, you know, and this happened to the grandmaster I played against a couple of weeks ago. I think he was just winning and he just kept moving, and before you know it, I was back in the game. So rook c1, castles, knight e4. I like the fact white is playing very actively. You know, this has been a very impressive play by the young man Callistus. Knight e4 is a tempo on the rook. The rook moves. I have an opportunity to play f3, defend my pawn on e4, and then just try to exploit the weak points in black's position. You know, like c6, like c7. So knight e5, rook to d6, f3. I mean, this is just beautiful. You know, this is beautiful. So at some point in time, we have to look back in this position and say, okay, when exactly did black get it wrong? When exactly did black get it wrong? And one of the moves that was really questionable for black was the bishop to b4. Yes, the bishop b4 check was not necessary. I think the engine preferred taking on d4. If the queen takes back, queen takes, knight f6. You can even do bishop check, knight f6, and black has this very slight advantage based on the engine. So a knight e8. What's the idea? Number one, white cannot go to the 7th rank to put pressure on the bishop and the pawn. The bishop is a weakness. The pawn is a weakness. Why is the bishop a weakness? It's a piece undefended. Why is the pawn a weakness? It's a pawn undefended. And of course, with the knight e8, black is looking to play f6 to force the knight from this very strong and annoying square. So a5. What's the point of a5? You know, anytime you have a majority, this is a majority. That means white has more pawns than black, so you have an opportunity to create a pass pawn. That's one. Two, anytime you're playing, you always want to play where you are strongest. That means where you have the most pieces. So a5 really makes a lot of sense. If we could exchange all the pieces of the board, this is just totally lost for black, because this 2 wins against 1. This one can't really get here on time because the king can easily stop it. So a5 was played. Rook to d8, a6, pawns keep going. Bishop to a8, rook c8. Anytime you're up in a game of chess, exchange pieces. Anytime you're up in a game of chess, exchange pieces. Keep it as simple as possible, because the fewer the pieces on the board, the less trouble your opponent can cause. So rook to c8, knight d6, gobble back, rook c7, putting pressure on the weak c7 square. Pawn on a7 is hanging, looks pretty dim for black. f6, attacking the knight on e5, and knight d7. You know, I really like the way this guy is playing. It's playing so actively. You know, why am I saying that? He could have actually gone to c6, you know, but he said, you know, I'm going to go to d7, so that don't even think about bringing your king, because I have a lot of nasty discover check. You know, yeah, knight here, it's possible. Where else can we put the check? Yeah. So knight d7, knight c8, protecting the pawn. This is really tough. Protecting the pawn. Knight to c5. What's the point of knight to c5? Probably trying to knight c6 is possible. Knight b7 is possible. Sorry. What else? Knight a6 is possible. Knight e6. Putting pressure on g7. And also, by moving the knight, we're clearing this diagonal for the bishop. So, knight to b6, knight e6. Attacking the rook, attacking the pawn on g7. The rook moves to d7. I'm sure this is a move Ajibola did not want to play. Why? Because like I said earlier, when you're behind, you don't trade pieces. But actually, you have no choice because you're about to lose another pawn. So at least this is one move he didn't really like to play, but he had to make the move. So rook d7 captures back, captures. Now white started this game giving up a pawn, which black took gladly and decided to hold on to it for as long as possible. But if we take stock now, black has how many pawns? He has a7, f6, g7, and h7. So that's 4 pawns. And white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. White has 6 pawns. So white is just dominating. This is just pretty much over. It's a matter of time when black resigns. But interestingly, black still hung in there. You know, not as if there was any hope, but you gotta just keep playing and try to tell your opponent, hey, let me see how you convert your advantage. So knight b6, king d2, king f2. Now this is the point I mentioned earlier. You know, your king is very, very important, especially in the end game. You know, my earlier plan was just to bring the king to d2 instead of the castle, but then white has so much advantage, so it doesn't really matter much. King e6, king e3, g6, knight to b3. What's the idea of knight to b3? It's probably looking to get this knight to a better square, either c5, keeping pressure on these two squares, either a5. We'll see. King e7, king d4, king to d6, knight to a5. The idea is to check exchange of that knight, make your life a little bit more easier. So he's like, no, I'm not gonna let you do that. Knight d7, knight check still, king moves to e6, bishop to c2. What's the point of bishop to c2? Of course, it's kind of trying to relocate the bishop to a good square, you know. Although in this position, I think f4 was a possible move, you know, stopping the knight from coming here. So he plays bishop to c2, g5, bishop to b3, king gets out of the pin, knight to e3. What's the point of knight to e3? He's probably going to try to move his knight to d5, 1, or probably just move the bishop to d5, exchange of the bishop, so that, you know, these pawns can move in peace. So king d6, bishop d5. Yeah, thought about that. He says, well, I'm still gonna keep playing. Takes back, knight d5. Another pawn is about to get missing. He says, well, I'm gonna hold on to that pawn, but now here comes the path to the king to clear, make the b pawn move, and then that gives the a pawn a clear path to queening. And also, you have to note in this position, this knight has no squares. You know, we always see knights on the rim is deep. This is way out in the, you know, in the bush, pretty much, in the corner. So know how to get in the game. You can't get away from this pawn. He's going to grab another pawn, and there's another hanging. So what to do? f5. You know, try to, you know, some tricks. You know, f5, takes on f5, takes back, king steps in. He's going to gobble on the knight. The knight is not going anywhere. He's going to gobble on the pawn on a7, and with the 2 pawns, victory is in sight. He attacks the knight on d5 with king e5. He says, if you want to have my knight on d5, be my guest. The a8 is going to be captured. Captures on d5, captures on a8, game's still going. He says, well, I'm going to keep playing, see what happens. King to c5, king takes pawn on a7, king d5, and at this point, Ajibola resigned. Yeah, it was an interesting game. Um, was an interesting game. And like I said, one thing you really want to take from this game is the fact that at some point in time, Black actually, even after capturing the pawn, Black actually had an opportunity to maintain a slight edge. And that was the point where he moved the bishop to b4 check. He should have just captured on d4. But, and capturing on d4 is not something you really want to do naturally. Because like I said earlier, it's always a good idea to keep the tension for as long as possible. And when there is a time needed, you ease the tension and always make that happen when it makes your position better. So this was an interesting game between the eventual winner of the tournament, Callistus, Tongan, and between himself and Ajibola and Olanrewaju. And I'm sure, Ajibola will be looking forward to getting Callistus the next time. Because Ajibola is somebody that always believes in these punishing the young ones, and he's actually made that happen a number of times. So big congratulations to Callistus for a nice game and winning the tournament, and nice game from Ajibola, although he had his chance, but he totally missed it. Bishop to b4. Let me go back and just point out what I mean by bishop to b4 so that we have an idea of where Black could have actually maintained a very slight advantage. Very slight, nothing spectacular, probably about minus 0.1, 0.2 thereabout. Yes, actually about minus, at this point, e5, knight f3 was not a good move by white. Now he plays bishop to b4. This gives white a slight advantage. Now the engine say just take on d4. If it takes back on d4, bishop b4 check, bishop to d2, bishop takes d2, knight b takes d2, queen takes d4, knight takes d4, and c3. So you move. I can play b4, a5. Engine set is kind of even. Anyway, but that's about it, and I'm definitely going to bring some more games from the tournament. It was an interesting tournament. Perhaps definitely touch on games by International Master Odirovsky, IM Femi Balogun as well. And I think there were some nice games played by Abdurrahman, Biola, who else? And there are some young ones. And I have to say I'm a little surprised that Tolu Animi didn't play as well. He's such a promising player. Probably he's not been the same since the last national championship. But you got to watch out for him. I know he's going to be back very soon. So thank you very much for this game. Looking at this game, check the game, and I hope we check the game out and make comments, like and share. And if there's any game you want to check out, you could kindly put them in the comment, and I'm definitely going to look into it. So like I said again, this is International Master Oladapo Adu, and thanks for being here. See you soon. Bye for now.